What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and with this being the most popular weekend for fantasy football drafts, I imagine a lot of you guys are scrolling through YouTube, cramming before your drafts this weekend. So today, I'm going to tell you how to draft the perfect fantasy football team in 15 minutes. We're going to break down position by position, how I'm attacking each, and go through my strategy for drafts this summer. As always, if you enjoy, leave a like. Subscribe if you're new. We're going to skip the intro. We're going to get right into it. Now, we talk about running back draft strategy. We have to understand that running backs are fragile assets. You can't just take a bunch early and just load your team up with running backs, and then you're taking on a lot of risk. We look at the early rounds last year. You had, of course, McCaffrey up top, but then after that, Nick Chubb was a bust. Eckler was a bust. Bijan was a bust. Pollard was a bust. You had on top of that, Ramondre was a bust. A lot of these early round running backs, they bust, whether it's for poor play or also injuries here. When we look at running backs versus wide receivers inside of the top 24 for positional ADP over the last 3 seasons, running backs are missing 4 or more games 1.35 times as much as the wide receiver. So when we draft these running backs early, we have to understand the risk that they are putting onto your team. Now, of course, wide receivers bust as well, right? Cooper Kupp last year, but the overwhelming majority of them have a high floor, and then, of course, have the upside of guys like CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown last year and Tyreek Hill. So there is a give and a take when it comes to taking a running back early or a wide receiver early. And in order to draft a running back early, I believe in the legendary running back upside theory, which was coined by Pat Kerrane. And the whole idea is that if you take a running back in the early rounds, he needs to have legendary upside. And all legendary upside means is finishing as like the RB1 overall, right? That was Christian McCaffrey last year, and he paid off. Because again, if you're going to take on the risk of a running back, you need the upside to offset the risk. And we look at the top 10 point per game running back season since 2019. So over the last 5 years, we're actually really good at spotting these legendary running backs. Outside of Kyren Williams last year, who got off of waivers, every single running back on this list since 2019 has been drafted inside of the top 12 running backs per ADP, and those are guys that you're getting inside of the top 3 rounds. So I see a lot of people when they first play fantasy football, they really want running backs, and running backs do run fantasy football, but when you chase running backs into round 4, 5, 6, 7, and you draft running backs through the flex and onto your bench spot, you're taking on a ton of risk, and you no longer have the upside of these monster seasons outside of the first 3 rounds. Now, when we talk about outside of the first 3 rounds with running backs, we are also avoiding the dead zone. My goal personally is to have anywhere from like 0 to 2 running backs through the first 6 rounds. I want to stay balanced. I don't want to take up, 5 running backs through 6 rounds, and then all of a sudden my quarterbacks suck, and my tight ends suck, my flex isn't good, and my wide receivers aren't great either. So I like to stay balanced. You can have like a max of 3 through round 6, but again, it's like a sweet snack. You have the entire box of the chocolates, you're going to be sick, but you have a couple, and you're really working with something here. But when we talk about the dead zone, outside of the running backs early on, and the reason why I don't want to draft 5 running backs through 6 rounds and go robust RB is because when we look at wins above replacement, even in this new environment where I went to ESPN and Sleeper and found roughly how many running backs get drafted in each round, how many wide receivers, we can still see, even in an environment where the wide receivers are as expensive as ever, even on ESPN, and the running backs are as cheap as ever, there is still a dead zone. We look at wins above replacement. It is a Destination Devy resource I used from them where they look at your league, the replacement level player, how much value over replacement, and it pretty much just puts wide receivers and running backs on the same playing field. And when we look at the difference, right, running back versus receiver, the 2 that stick out are round 4, 5, and 6 is the biggest discrepancy. So there, we want to be drafting wide receivers, we want to be drafting quarterbacks, tight ends, all of that, and avoiding the running backs. Now, of course, a Sith does not deal in absolutes, all right? Or only a Sith deals in absolutes. I absolutely butchered that. It's 15 minutes. We're not editing that out. But, of course, when we talk here, there might be a spot where you want to take a running back. I like James Cook. I like Kenneth Walker. If I'm going to take any 2 running backs in that middle of the round or, 4 to 6 range, those are my guys. I will say as well, when we talk about those legendary running backs, to me, I like McCaffrey, Brees, Bijan, Gibbs, JT, Achane. Those are my 6 guys that I'm targeting in those early rounds. And of course, when we're not taking the running backs early, we are instead taking the receivers in that round 4 to 6 range or the other positions. And then also when we talk about running backs, you can see here in the green box, round 7 and 8. That round 7 and 8 area is, to me, like the money zone. That's where you got Pacheco last year. That's where you got Rashad White last year. A little bit after that, you got Devon Achane. And you can see here on this chart, when we look at rounds 5 and 6 running backs, 0.08 wins above replacement. And you look at round 7 and 8 running backs, 0.05. That's pretty similar. So we can kind of say that round 5 and 6 running backs are not much better than your round 7 and 8 running backs, so why not just wait till round 7 and 8 to take your RB2s or your running backs? You have to remember as well, the dead zone in that rounds 4 through 6 area, a lot of the time you're just drafting your RB2, which a lot of the times those RB2s, of course, from the wins above replacement data, don't do you much good because, one, you can get these guys off of waivers, right? Even if it wasn't Kyron Williams last year, it was Zach Moss, it was Zeke Elliott, it was Devon Achane, it was you could also get guys like Jerome Ford off of waivers and put them into your starting lineup last year. I don't know if I said Gus Edwards, but him as well. And then also, again, in that round 7 to 8 area, we can just hammer them later, take other teams' handcuffs, take ambiguous backfield, young upside swings. I like personally in that round 7 range, Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, Chase Brown. I did want to give you guys some targets in this video as well. And then when we talk about handcuffing, that's a big topic. People bring it up on my streams all the time. Ron, what about this? Can I handcuff my running back? Can I do this? I call a handcuff the RB2 behind any running back drafted in the first 5 or 6 rounds. And my personal opinion is that I don't draft my own handcuff. I draft other teams' handcuffs. Let's say I take Kyron Williams early. If you then spend a 9th or 10th round pick on Blake Corum, you're spending a pick that could be an upside play and be next year's Devon Achane. You're spending a pick that only benefits from a Kyron Williams injury, who's your early round running back. So if you are spending draft capital on a player who only benefits from your early round pick busting, you're drafting, not to lose, right? And I'm trying to get first place, in like a 12-man league, first place is like an 8% chance to get there. You got to thread a thin needle anyways. There's no reason to insure your bets. Now, if it's like, if you have McCaffrey and you really want your handcuff and Jordan Mason's literally out there on waivers, fine. That's a lower investment cost. But a lot of these round 12 and earlier guys, there's no reason to take those handcuffs. Take somebody else's handcuffs because for Blake Corum to go in, your RB1 has to go down and your team is worse. But if you draft like Tyler Algier instead and the Bijan owner's team goes down, you now have Kyron and Tyler Algier, who's going to be like a top 15 starter every week, and your team is just that much better. So in terms of the game theory there, I don't like to handcuff my own running backs. Now, let's move on to the wide receiver strategy of this video. And I sort of see, right, running backs are good, high upside picks, but you don't want too many of them, right? They're fragile assets. We don't want too many of them early. I do want to stack my bench with, waiver running backs and handcuffs and just have a bunch of lottery tickets on my bench late, right? Like last year's Kyron Williams, Zach Moss type of guys. You do want to fill up your bench with waiver fringe running backs, but that's like round 10 plus. I'm talking middle rounds here. But I view wide receivers in those middle rounds, right? Rounds like 1 through 10 as the life source of my team. I'm building my team around the receivers. And the reason for this is because I not only want receivers in my receiver spots, I want receivers in my flex. Now, if we look at Destination Devy, their wins above replacement tool, they actually tell you the optimal amount of league-wide flex starters in your league. And even in a pretty running back heavy format here, right? Half PPR, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, 12-team league. You should still have 9 wide receivers across the entire league. So 9 of the 12 teams should have wide receivers in their flex spots. And if that's the case in a running back hungry league, it's also the case in like your 3 wide receiver, 1 flex full PPR league. So we want to be optimizing for the ideal starting lineup, the optimal starting lineup, which has a wide receiver in the flex spot. Now, people like to disregard flexes and they just kind of call, oh, well, my flex spot is whatever. It'll be like a low-end wide receiver 2, and I'll just throw him in there from now and then. Your flex spot scores just as much as the other positions. So you can get huge value over your league mates if you actually put an elite player in the flex spot by drafting a really good receiver to go there. And RotoViz does a really good job of talking through dominating the flex. So they say when reading about the flex, usually hear it referred to in the context of, oh, he's a low-end RB2 or flex. Referring to guys who aren't good as flex players is kind of shorthand. Few writers are suggesting you intentionally start a weak player in your flex position. It can have the effect, however, of de-emphasizing a starting spot that counts just as much as any other lineup position. It can contaminate your strategy. In fact, the flex position is arguably the most important position in fantasy because it's one of the easiest positions to generate more value over average than your opponents. Whatever strategy fits your particular league format, the strategy should be based on putting an elite player in the flex position. That's really what it comes down to, especially in these home league drafts. If you can put an elite player in your flex, you are really cooking. Now, how do we do that? Well, my rule of thumb is based on your settings. I want wide receivers through the flex plus 1 or 2 by round 10, right? So 2 wide receivers, 1 flex. That's 2 wide receivers, 1 flex is 3, and then 1 or 2 more, 4 to 5 by round 10, and that can go so on here. And round 10 is like arbitrary, but it's really just, to me, the wide receiver cutoff of like after we look at this list, it's even getting pretty thin. Like to me, it's like after Keon Coleman, I don't want any of these receivers in my flex spot, but I moved it down to like Jameson Williams, but I don't want to have to rely. If I'm relying on Khalil Shakir in my flex, if I'm relying on Romeo Doubs, I no longer have an elite option in my flex spot. I at least like with like Keon Coleman and Jamison Williams. These are young upside swings, but once you get past that and it's like Josh Palmer and these guys, I'm not planning on having those guys in my flex spot. A lot of those I'm actually just using as late round dart throws on guys like A.D. Mitchell, Dontavion Wicks, like super high upside swings that can maybe really come alive towards the end of a season. Now, of course, in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, you only need 4 to 5 wide receivers. Now, I talked about earlier, I do think you can get away with just 0 running backs, but I only go 0 RB in like 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league. If you're in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, like half PPR, definitely take 1 running back through 3 rounds, and also just like really be on top of the idea of, okay, how many wide receivers should I have through 10 rounds, and then build around that and start breaking tides towards running backs, right? Because in that format where it's 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, that's only 4 to 5 wide receivers through round 10, meaning that you're going to be taking 5 to 6 running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends before that, and you need to sort of really think through strategically at what point should I be going away from receiver for these other positions, and kind of think through your draft that way of reverse engineering it. Now, you might ask, what is this graphic here of like consensus pick? I've gotten this question a ton, and this is a new site, or I don't know, it's like a landing page of a comparing leagues tool. I did a bunch of videos this offseason with like cheat sheets showing default rankings from each site. That is this. I'll have a link down below in the description and in the comment section if you'd like to use it. All I ask that if you use it and you compare, sleeper ADP versus high stakes ADP, and you want to see the ESPN ADP, it's all updated. It updates every single day. We have API running with it. All I ask that if you use it, subscribe and leave a like. Now, after that, I do want to say to make sure that you know your league settings, right? Know your league's default rankings. Those are the rankings that they are drafting off of. You can use this tool to figure that out. Also know, is it PPR, is it half PPR? Be on top of all of that. Know your league's tendencies. Know what default rankings you're using. Be on top of everything that you possibly can be. Now, after that, let's talk quarterback and tight end. The number one thing about quarterback and tight end is knowing your league settings, knowing if it's tight end premiums at 6-point passing touchdown, also knowing the starting lineup depth. So if it's like a 10-person, two wide receiver, 1 flex, you're going to have stacked flex options. Make sure you get an elite tight end. Make sure you get an elite quarterback, especially because the less wide receivers in flex spots, the higher percentage of the starting lineup your quarterback and tight end takes up. But if it's like a 3 wide receiver, 2 flex league, 12 people, that's now, 5 wide receivers you can start, 2 running backs, and then just 1 tight end and 1 quarterback. So the higher percentage of the lineup your quarterback or tight end takes up, the bigger priority they should be. Now, I will say in terms of quarterback and tight end, it kind of comes down to, how many running backs did you take early? Because then can you afford to take on the tight end or the quarterback? And I think that there's many ways to, what do they call, like skin a whatever. You can draft 1 quarterback early, 2 tight ends late, 1 tight end early, 2 quarterbacks late. I will say the biggest thing to me to really focus in on here is that I see people doing this all the time. Do not draft an elite quarterback or an elite tight end and then draft a backup. Again, we want to make sure that we are taking as many of those lottery tickets as we can, right? Where we're drafting next year's Zach Moss, next year's Kyron Williams, next year's Jerome Ford. Just stash those guys on your bench instead of a backup tight end. Like if you draft Travis Kelce, there is no reason whatsoever to then draft Taysom Hill. There's no reason to. You're going to have waivers. You can find another one off of waivers when bye weeks or injuries come about. So I put here the green line. That is the last quarterback and the last tight end. So Jordan Love is the last quarterback I would take until I would take 2 quarterbacks. So if I take Purdy, I want 2. Same thing with the Njoku side. If I take Bowers, I want 2 tight ends, and that sort of goes through the rest of that list. I will say as well, don't get too stuck on an individual draft strategy. Make sure that you have a very free mindset, kind of know your league, everything, go into the draft, take the best player through the first 3 rounds, and then sort of mold your strategy around that. I will say again, in your more running back heavy leagues, right, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, you do want to make sure you're prioritizing at least 1 running back early. Now, when it comes to like hero RB, double hero RB, don't force it. I get that question all the time. I'm picking from the 9 spot. Should I use hero RB here? No, just go into your draft, take the best players through 3 rounds, and sort of figure it out from there. I will have a playlist with all my strategies linked here. Now, when it comes to kicker and defense, man, we are running hot here. I use Subverter down. Don't draft them if you don't have to. If your league forces you to draft them, just take them in the last 2 rounds. Get your kicker, get your defense in the last 2 rounds based on what they're doing in week 1, like the projections for week 1. Subverter down is a resource I really like. I'll make sure I link them down below. Subverterdown.com is amazing. Like last year, David Aubrey was the kicker one. He was a guy off of waivers. And then last year, San Fran was like the first overall defense. They finished 10th. There's no reason to take an elite kicker or defense. Keep hammering the running backs. And then again, instead of taking kicker or defense as your last 2 picks, take upside running backs and just get a kicker and defense off of waivers before the Thursday game. Now, our last closing words here is make sure you practice. Make sure you use Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code RON. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. Make sure you go over there. They have all kinds of contests right now. They have like a $6 contest out. There's real money on the line. You can get in there and just kind of see where players should be going. And then also know your platform, right? Go on that platform. Try a mock draft or two. Get familiar with what that site looks like and what it feels like. And then also, I would also say another thing you can do for literally just $8, you can sign up on the Patreon and then unsubscribe if you'd like to, but check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I have my top 200 rankings and cheat sheet. All they're tiered. I have my targets, my avoids all outlined, my target rounds for each player, and they are just a good way of structurally drafting where I have the dead zone running backs pushed down, legendary running backs pushed up, and then in season you're going to get waiver wire articles from me. You're going to get rest of season rankings from me for trades. You're going to get, what else do I got? Waivers, rest of season rankings, and then weekly rankings, right? Where I'll have like flex rankings, my wide receiver rankings for each week. All of that good stuff on patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You can find it in the description or the comment section down below. As always, I appreciate you guys. Subscribe, leave a like, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm